The Charleston, South Carolina sunrise painted Battery Point Marina in the soft hues of spring 2025 as 70-year-old Tom Garrett expertly navigated his weathered vessel, the Sea's Oath, through the gentle Carolina tide. Her hull, bearing the scars of 3 decades at sea, still displayed faded Navy hull markings from Operation Desert Storm in '91, each a silent testament to a life lived on the water. A small inscription near the stern read, "Emma, 98, a tribute to his granddaughter, etched beside a dent from a daring rescue off Hilton Head that same year. Tom, his face lined but his spirit undimmed, fished with a practiced hand, occasionally tossing a flounder to the children laughing on the pier, who affectionately called out, "Hey, Chief!" Some remembered his heroic actions during Hurricane Katrina, saving a stranded crew against all odds. Others simply knew him for the free bait he offered during lean times. His late wife's pendant, tied securely to the helm, swung gently with the rhythm of the calm morning. Oblivious to the brewing storm, both literal and figurative, Tom secured his lines, humming a familiar sea shanty. Meanwhile, at a more exclusive dock nearby, the sleek 55-foot yacht, Tide's Crown, idled, its owner casting a dismissive glance towards the public marina. Tom checked his knots, attuned to the ocean's peaceful cadence, utterly unaware of the impending chaos that would soon shatter his tranquil morning. If you're drawn to stories of resilience and the quiet strength of everyday heroes, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more compelling narratives. A guttural roar ripped through the serene atmosphere of Battery Point as the Tide's Crown, a gleaming monument to excess, arrogantly accelerated, brazenly cutting through the no-wake zone with a defiant surge of power. Nathan Blake, a 40-year-old real estate magnate whose silk shirt shimmered under the morning sun, let out a boisterous laugh, his voice laced with entitlement. "Clear out the riffraff!" he bellowed to his equally ostentatious guests, a dismissive wave of his hand encompassing the entirety of the working marina. His yacht, a sleek fusion of polished glass and cold steel, sliced through the water with reckless abandon, generating a violent wake that slammed into Tom Garrett's humble Sea's Oath with brutal force, sending the smaller vessel careening violently into the weathered pilings of the pier. The sickening sound of splintering wood echoed across the water, a sharp, cracking report that spoke of irreversible damage. Water immediately began to gush into the Sea's Oath's fractured hull, the tranquil morning air now thick with the scent of salt and the sharp tang of freshly broken timber. "Slow down!" Tom roared, his voice, usually a calm murmur against the backdrop of the sea, now a desperate cry that cut through the festive atmosphere emanating from the larger yacht. His eyes, wide with disbelief and a dawning sense of outrage, locked onto the figure at the helm of the Tide's Crown. Nathan Blake merely offered a contemptuous smirk, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "Buy a real boat, old-timer!" he sneered, his voice amplified by the expanse of the water, carrying his callous remark to everyone within earshot. A chorus of laughter erupted from the guests aboard the Tide's Crown, a jarring symphony of privilege and indifference. Several of them raised their champagne flutes in mocking salute, while others eagerly pulled out their smartphones, capturing the unfolding disaster with predatory glee. One particularly animated woman, adorned with a string of pearls that seemed to mock the simplicity of Tom's existence, shrieked with laughter, clutching the arm of a man in a crisp linen suit. Someone on board even began a live stream, the hashtag #SunkVet already flashing across their screen, a digital brand being stamped onto Tom's misfortune in real time. The Tide's Crown continued its arrogant trajectory, its powerful stereo system now thumping out a bass-heavy beat that seemed to mock the death throes of the smaller vessel. It sped away, leaving behind a churning wake and the devastating aftermath of its recklessness. Tom found himself waist-deep in the frigid water, desperately clinging to a jagged piece of the Sea's Oath's wreckage, the once familiar wood now a treacherous splintered mess. The pendant, his wife's cherished keepsake that had always swung faithfully at the helm, slipped beneath the murky surface, a tangible representation of a memory sinking into the depths. On the pier, the teenagers who had moments before greeted him with cheerful shouts now stood in stunned silence, their phones still recording, adding sad trombone sound effects to their clips, a generation grappling with empathy in the language they understood best. With a surge of adrenaline born of years of facing far greater dangers, Tom hauled himself onto a larger piece of floating debris, his knuckles white as he gripped the splintered wood, not from the cold, but from a rising tide of fury that threatened to consume him. A marina attendant, his face a mixture of pity and awkwardness, approached Tom, offering a waterlogged form. "Here you go, sir. For the insurance, The words hung in the air, a cruel reminder of Tom's precarious situation. There was no insurance. The sea's oath had been built and maintained with the meager remnants of his pension, a testament to his enduring love for the sea, not a calculated financial risk. The casual cruelty of Nathan Blake's wake continued to ripple outwards, a final, devastating slap as the tangible remnants of Tom's past, his boat, his memories, his peace, dissolved into the unforgiving tide of Charleston Harbor. The shock of the collision began to give way to a profound sense of loss and injustice, the laughter and jeers from the departing yacht echoing in the sudden heavy silence that had fallen over the marina. The vibrant morning had been irrevocably stained by an act of callous disregard, leaving Tom adrift in more ways than one. Twilight descended upon Charleston, casting long, melancholic shadows over the quiet streets. The gentle lapping of the harbor against the pilings carried a somber rhythm, a stark contrast to the violent crashing of moments before. Back in his small, weathered cottage, the sea air whispered through the open windows, carrying the faint scent of salt and the lingering ache of loss. Tom's faded navy cap lay askew on a nearby table, a silent witness to his quiet despair. A photograph, its colors softened by time, and the salty air, sat beside a lukewarm mug of coffee. A younger Tom, brimming with purpose in his '05 Katrina relief uniform, a stark reminder of a time when his service was met with gratitude, not scorn. The digital world, however, offered no such solace. The SunkVet hashtag on TikTok had exploded, the view count surpassing a staggering 100,000. The comments section was a brutal landscape of callous indifference and outright mockery. "Old man couldn't handle the waves," one commenter sneered. "Veteran versus cash. Cash wins every time," another heartlessly declared. The anonymity of the internet had emboldened a wave of cruelty, each keystroke a fresh stab at Tom's dignity. A text message notification pinged on his old phone. It was from Emma, his granddaughter. "Grandpa, I'm on my way." A flicker of warmth sparked within him, quickly followed by a wave of shame. "I'm not a vagrant," he mumbled to the empty room, the sting of Nathan Blake's words still sharp. 40 years of unwavering service, of facing down storms both natural and man-made, reduced to a viral meme, a punchline for online amusement. The memory of pulling Admiral Lawson from the churning waters during Katrina, the Admiral's hand gripping his with desperate gratitude, felt like a distant dream, overshadowed by the burning humiliation of Nathan's dismissive taunt. The next morning dawned with a muted grayness, mirroring the heaviness in Tom's heart. He shuffled down to the marina, his steps slow and weary, his gaze fixed on the debris field where the sea's oath had once proudly floated. He scanned the wreckage, a futile search for anything salvageable, a stray piece of fishing gear, a familiar knot of rope, anything that might tether him to his lost life. As he stood there, amidst the splintered wood and floating remnants of his past, a young figure approached hesitantly. It was Emma. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and in her hands she held a framed photograph, a vibrant image of the sea's oath in its prime, sails full, cutting through a sparkling sea. She gently placed it amongst the wreckage, a silent tribute, a small act of defiance against the overwhelming cruelty. She didn't say a word, her tearful gaze meeting his for a brief, heart-wrenching moment before she turned and hurried away, leaving Tom alone once more with his grief. A marina employee, witnessing the exchange, simply shrugged, a look of detached pity on his face. "Kids feel bad, I guess." Online, a small counter-movement had begun to gain traction. A few voices, horrified by the blatant injustice, started using the hashtag #HonorVet, their comments pleading for decency and accountability. "He's a hero! Make them pay!" one user passionately wrote. "This is disgusting! Show some respect!" another echoed. But their pleas were quickly buried under the relentless tide of mockery and derision. Tom stood amidst the wreckage, the damp, salt-stained American flag clutched tightly in his trembling hand. "We don't break," he whispered to the silent harbor, his voice hoarse with emotion, a stubborn ember of defiance flickering within the overwhelming fog of despair that threatened to engulf him. Hope, however, felt like a distant shore, receding further with each passing hour in the cold, indifferent mist of Charleston. The weight of his loss pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating, a stark reminder of the fragility of his world in the face of unchecked privilege and the viral cruelty of the digital age. The vibrant life he had known, the respect he had earned, seemed to be dissolving like sea foam on the shore, leaving behind only the bitter taste of injustice. The pale morning light crept over Battery Point, illuminating the flotsam and jetsam scattered across the water, the remnants of Tom's shattered life. He moved slowly, his back aching, methodically picking up pieces of debris, a futile attempt to restore some semblance of order to the chaos. Just as a wave of despair threatened to overwhelm him once more, a sudden collective gasp rippled through the small crowd that had gathered at the edge of the marina. Tom squinted, his weary eyes struggling to focus on the horizon. What he saw stole his breath away. 8 gray behemoths were cutting through the morning mist, their imposing silhouettes growing larger with each passing moment. A United States Navy flotilla was steaming into Charleston Harbor. Leading the formation was a sleek frigate, the American flag snapping proudly in the gentle breeze, followed by a phalanx of heavily armed patrol boats and the unmistakable low profile of a submarine, its dark hull slicing silently through the waves. The air crackled with a sudden, palpable energy. The low hum of powerful engines filled the air, replacing the earlier silence of despair. Unmanned aerial vehicles, their rotors whirring, buzzed overhead, their cameras undoubtedly capturing the unfolding scene. The small crowd on the pier, moments before somber and sympathetic, now buzzed with excited chatter, their initial pity morphing into awe and anticipation. The live streams that had once mocked Tom were now broadcasting a different kind of spectacle, the hashtag #SunkVet slowly being overtaken by something new. On board the Tide's Crown, which was still moored at the exclusive dock, Nathan Blake stood frozen, his face ashen, his hands visibly trembling as he gripped the railing. The bravado of the previous day had completely evaporated, replaced by a stark terror as the enormity of the situation began to dawn on him. A sleek, rigid-hulled, inflatable boat, RHOP-IB, detached itself from the lead frigate and sped towards the public marina. As it approached, a figure stepped onto the pier, his uniform crisp and authoritative, the glint of stars on his collar unmistakable. It was Admiral Mark Lawson, now 62, his face etched with a stern resolve. He walked directly towards Tom, his gaze unwavering. "Commander Garrett," he said, his voice a low, resonant steel that cut through the murmuring crowd, his hand raised in a formal salute. Tom, weary and still disoriented, instinctively returned the salute, a lifetime of military discipline overriding his current despair. He could only stare in stunned disbelief. "You saved my life, Garrett," Admiral Lawson continued, his voice softening slightly, a hint of emotion entering his tone. "Katrina, my entire crew, we owe you everything." He turned to address the stunned onlookers, his gaze sweeping across the marina, encompassing both the humbled onlookers and the increasingly panicked occupants of the Tide's Crown. "This man," he declared, his voice rising with righteous indignation, "has spent his life defending the very freedoms that allowed that individual to act with such appalling disregard. Yesterday, greed and arrogance tried to sink not just his boat, but his honor." At that moment, 2 Navy divers surfaced near the wreckage of the Sea's Oath. One of them held aloft something small and glinting, Tom's wife's pendant. The other carefully cradled the waterlogged but still intact American flag. A collective murmur of respect rippled through the crowd. The flotilla of warships began to maneuver, slowly encircling the tide's crown, effectively trapping it within their imposing presence. Admiral Lawson's gaze locked onto Nathan Blake, who was now visibly sweating, his earlier arrogance replaced by a palpable fear. "Blake!" Lawson called out, his voice amplified by a nearby Marine officer. "You didn't just sink a boat. You sank respect. You sank decency. You sank the very values this nation holds dear. We are here to refloat them." Just then, a figure broke through the crowd and ran towards Tom. It was Emma, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes shining with relief and pride. She threw her arms around him, holding him tight, the framed photograph of the sea's oath clutched in her hand. A deep, resonant sound echoed across the harbor, the klaxon of the submarine, a powerful, unmistakable declaration. "Honor stands!" A voice boomed from a loudspeaker on one of the patrol boats, the words hanging heavy in the air. Tom's throat tightened. The ocean, which had seemed to betray him just hours before, now roared back with the powerful voice of justice and the unwavering support of his fellow service members. The tide had turned. The midday sun warmed Charleston, bathing the harbor in a golden light that felt like a benediction. The tension that had gripped Battery Point just hours before began to dissipate, replaced by a palpable sense of resolution and quiet satisfaction. Admiral Lawson, standing beside Tom, gestured towards a newly christened vessel that had been gently towed into the marina. It was a small but sturdy sailboat, its lines clean and its sails crisp white. "Commander Garrett," Lawson announced, his voice filled with genuine respect. "Meet the Garrett's Oath, built with the generous contributions of sailors and citizens from across the state." A small plaque gleamed on its stern, bearing the same proud name that had adorned Tom's previous boat. The focus then shifted to Nathan Blake, who stood pale and visibly shaken, flanked by two uniformed Marines. There was no arrest, no public berating. Instead, Admiral Lawson addressed him with a quiet authority that was far more impactful than any shouting. "Mr. Blake," he stated, his gaze unwavering, "the Navy doesn't deal in petty retribution. We deal in accountability. As a gesture of community reconciliation, and to perhaps salvage a modicum of respect, you will be funding a vocational training program for veterans here in Charleston. A program that will equip them with skills and opportunities as they transition back to civilian life. This isn't a fine, Mr. Blake. It's an investment. An investment in the very people whose sacrifices you so carelessly disregarded." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant cries of gulls. Then, a surprising sound arose from the group of teenagers who had witnessed the sinking. Tentative at first, it grew into a spontaneous round of applause, a genuine expression of remorse and newfound respect. Even the previously indifferent marina staff offered quiet nods of acknowledgement. A chant began to ripple through the crowd, growing louder with each repetition. "Chief! Chief! Chief!" A new, more permanent plaque was unveiled near the rebuilt section of the pier. It read simply, "Tom Garrett. Service endures." Emma stepped forward and gently squeezed Tom's hand, her voice soft with emotion. "Nana would have been so proud of you, Grandpa. She's watching." Tom, his voice thick with emotion, simply replied, "Just needed my boat back, Emma." Weeks turned into months. The Garrett's Oath became a familiar sight on the Charleston waters, its sails often filled with the laughter of veterans learning the ropes under Tom's patient guidance. He taught them knots and navigation, sharing his lifetime of experience and finding a quiet peace in the rhythm of the sea once more. The Battery Point Marina subtly ostracized Nathan Blake, the collective will of the community, a silent but powerful condemnation. A new sign was erected at the entrance of the public dock, reserved for those who serve. Tom largely ignored the accolades and the local celebrity he had inadvertently become. He preferred the quiet solitude of fishing at dawn, the respectful nods and murmured, "Thank you, Chief," from his fellow Charlestonians, a far more meaningful reward. The hashtag HonorVet began to trend, a wave of support and admiration washing across social media. effectively drowning out the remnants of the earlier hateful mockery. News outlets picked up the story, not as a tale of tragedy and humiliation, but as a powerful narrative of resilience, community, and the enduring respect for those who have served. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Tom stood on the deck of the Garrett's Oath, a gentle breeze filling its sails. He raised a weathered mug towards the vast expanse of the ocean, a silent toast, not to fame, not to recognition, but to the enduring call of duty, to the quiet dignity of service, and to the unwavering spirit of those who stand watch on the sea. A final message appeared on screens across the nation. Join the wave of valor, subscribe and share stories of honor and resilience. The tide had truly turned, and so, as the sun sets once more over Charleston Harbor, we're left with powerful lessons echoing from Tom Garrett's story. It reminds us of the quiet strength and unwavering dignity that often resides in those who have dedicated their lives to service, individuals whose contributions may go unnoticed until a moment of crisis. The callous disregard shown by Nathan Blake serves as a stark reminder of the corrosive nature of entitlement and the ease with which privilege can blind us to the humanity of others. But perhaps the most resonant message is the extraordinary power of community and collective conscience. When faced with injustice, the voices of compassion and the unwavering support of a united community can rise up, not only to right a wrong, but to reaffirm the values of respect, honor, and empathy that bind us together. The swift and decisive action of the Navy underscores the enduring importance of integrity and the profound bond that exists among those who have served. Ultimately, Tom's story is a testament to the fact that true honor isn't measured in wealth or status, but in character, resilience, and the enduring impact of a life lived with integrity. It's a call to remember the quiet heroes among us, to stand up against injustice, and to recognize that even in the face of adversity, the human spirit, supported by a strong community, can ultimately prevail, ensuring that honor, like the tide, will always rise again.